of these. Okay, we're live and we're ready to go. Is Ruth here? Oh, we're not starting if we don't have Ruth. Where's we're going to start in a minute. The presenter of the elections bill is in a probe, so we're going to start in a minute. Is that okay? Okay, let's pass out those sheets. Welcome, everybody. We are live in the Senate Democratic Caucus. It is Thursday, the 11th of May, and we have on the floor. Did you get your? We're going to get you the other mic. What? Yeah. Okay, we are discussing right now H429, which is the elections bill that came to us from the House. And we have married it with the ranked choice voting bill, which we have already voted out on a very strong vote. And I would like to turn the floor over to Senator Hardy, who is going to walk us through this.
I really need this?
And she sent you a summary in your email, and they're on. Okay, Senator Hardy, if you'd come this way and so people can see you from both sides. Great, perfect.
Okay. Hi, everybody. This feels really weird. Okay, so H429 is a miscellaneous elections bill that came to us from the House. And we have, as Senator Clarkson said, in the Senate Government Operations Committee, combined it with S32, which was the ranked choice voting bill that we passed out, I believe, on a 24-6 vote in March. And this bill has a number of provisions in it. So I wanted to walk you through the provisions. There's been a lot of chatter in the building about it. So I wanted to just make sure that everybody understood what was actually in the bill, because the bill in the House had a lot more provisions that came out of the bill and are not in the Senate version of the bill. And then we added a few things that were not in the House version of the bill. So I emailed the caucus last night a schedule, and I think you all have a paper copy of it. And we have the Secretary of State and the Deputy Secretary of State and the Director of State Elections here with us, who worked with us closely on this bill and on S32. So if there are any technical questions or things I can't answer, we have the experts in the room with us as well. And they are in support of the bill. It's fair to say, but I will let the secretary speak for herself on that one. But the first provision, and this is not exactly in the order of the bill, it was just the order my brain was thinking last night when I was doing them. So the first one is a candidate financial disclosure provision. As you know, we all have to submit financial disclosure forms. All candidates for state office do when we submit our petitions. And those financial disclosure forms are submitted to the Secretary of State's office. This is a provision that was requested by the Ethics Commission that expands the scope of financial disclosures for candidates to include both state and now county offices. And the 5 elected county offices are sheriff, secretary, state's attorney, assistant judge, probate judge, and high bailiff. And those candidates right now don't have to submit financial disclosure forms, but this adds the provision that they do have to submit it. And then it creates a penalty for people who don't submit the forms in time of $10 per day. And it is assessed by by the Ethics Commission in working with the Attorney General and the Secretary of State's office to deal with the sort of logistics of it. And this improves the transparency of and accountability for candidates, so voters are aware of potential conflicts of interests. This is not a new requirement. It is just being able to have some, enforcement of the current requirement that candidates submit financial disclosure forms. So that is the first provision. And again, this was something that the Ethics Commission came to us at the beginning of the session and requested. The second is a secure limited electronic ballot return. I know many of you are probably getting emails about this provision, so I wanted to make sure you understood this. This permits electronic ballot return through a secure portal for a narrowly defined group of Vermonters. as we define it in the Senate Government Operations Committee bill, people with disabilities and overseas voters only, including military personnel who are stationed or deployed overseas. And this is really important to understand because people with disabilities are defined in this bill the same as they're defined under the Public Accommodations Act. The Public Accommodation Act requires, as it's called, public accommodations for people with disabilities. And as we see it, this is a public accommodation for people with disabilities to be able to vote. It also includes people who are living overseas, whether that's for educational purposes, military purposes, or family purposes. If they are overseas, and that would include any place that is basically not in the United States or United States territory. Right now, under federal law, a certain group of voters, the Military and Overseas Voters Empowerment Act of 2009, who fall under what are called UOCAVA voters, the Uniformed Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act, we have to submit ballots to them electronically. So we are already sending ballots out to a broader group of voters electronically. This is only about ballot return for a narrower group of voters. And it is done through a secure portal that is only accessed by the voter themselves, who can submit it electronically. Currently, what they do is they print their ballot from that portal. We already are using that portal. They print it and have to mail it. This would mean they could press a button and electronically resubmit it back. Just those narrowly defined voters. We got some very compelling testimony from blind voters. This would enable them to vote using their assistive technology on their own, because they could vote, return their ballot electronically. This is something that the disability rights community is very keen on. I just want to also make sure you understand that 31 other states already have this provision. They already allow electronic ballot return for UOCAVA voters, and a lot of them do it in a much less secure fashion. I was at an NCSL voting conference just last week. I asked the 20 other people who were there, and most of them say, oh yeah, we just have them fax it back or email it back through their own email, which is much less secure than the portal that we're suggesting. So I just wanted to make sure you understand that this was narrowed, and it is for specific types of voters who have a really hard time accessing the return of their ballot because of their disability or because of their status as an overseas voter. The second is about candidate demographic data collection, and it includes optional data collection of the demographics of voters. As you'll recall, candidates have to fill out a form saying who they are and that they're planning to vote. This would just include some collection of demographic data that would be kept by the, sort of secured at the Secretary of State's office. The Secretary of State could only release that data in aggregate form, not on an individual form, and it would be kept confidential and exempt from the Public Records Act. So somebody couldn't request, oh, I want to know, Senator Perchlik's demographic data. They couldn't request an individual, just the aggregate data. And this is, and then clerks could collect this at the local level. People can say, I don't want to give my demographic data. They would not be prevented from running for office. It's just a way of being able to, like we do in many other policy areas, understand the demographics of people who are running for office and how the demographics of candidates look compared to the demographics of our state, and make sure we can improve access for candidates of color, LGBTQ candidates, and women candidates as examples. The next is about write-in candidate notifications and thresholds. This was a provision that was really advocated for by our town clerks. And this, I want to make sure you understand, is only for state and county elections. It's not for municipal elections. And it requires notification by the second Friday prior to an election of anyone who plans to run as a write-in candidate. So the second Friday prior to the election day or primary day, Somebody could say, I want to run as a primary, I want to run as a write-in candidate. And that would then trigger the notification to clerks that they need to count those write-in votes for that specific person. So I'm going to use Andy again. Andy Perchlik says, I want to run as a write-in candidate for sheriff or something like that. Then the clerks would know that Andy wants to run, and they would count all the Andy Perchliks. The reason that this is important for clerks is right now they have to individually count every single write-in for Mickey Mouse or Abraham Lincoln or whomever somebody randomly puts on the ballot. And it takes a lot of time, hours of time, and they have to individually report all of the counts for Mickey Mouse, for president, or for sheriff. And this is just saying for write-in candidates, for people who know they want to be a write-in candidate, there's plenty of time for people to know that there's a vacancy where they might want to be a write-in candidate, or for themselves to launch a write-in campaign. And this would give a 10-day notification. It does not apply to municipal elections. So if there's a vacancy at the municipal level, and you know that on town meeting day, a bunch of people get, oh, let's all write in Andy Perchlik for school board, that could still happen. This does not apply to municipal elections. And that was really important to our friends over in the House, but we also agreed that this should not apply to municipal, but this is something that would make the clerk's job a lot easier. It also increases the threshold for write-in candidates to win a primary to greater than 10% of the votes cast, or the number of signatures required to run, so that you have to get at least the same number of write-ins as you would have had to get signatures to run. But if you're a write-in candidate that receives more votes than the candidate whose name is on the ballot, you would win. So it doesn't prevent you from winning if you beat the person who is actually on the ballot. It just prevents you from winning if you if there's nobody else on the ballot and you don't get enough votes. The next provision has a bunch of different names, but it's literally called by political scientists and lawyers. It's called the sore loser law, or the one bite of the apple, or the pick your lane. I don't know. Prohibits candidates who lose a major party primary election from running in the general election as another party's candidate or as an independent candidate. Again, this is commonly known as the sore loser law in political science fields. And this is just if you run in one major party and any of the three major parties and you lose the primary, you can't then run as an independent candidate in that same race, or switch and try to get the nomination of a different party in that same race. Nearly every other state has a sore loser law. There are only 3 other states that do not. So it is a very, very common law across the state and across the country in both red states and blue states. This would just put us in line with most of the other states that says that you need to, if you lose your party's nomination, you don't get to switch parties or become an independent in that same race. Campaign finance limits for statewide candidates. This permits candidates for statewide office to contribute up to $20,000 to a political party in an election cycle. Current law permits only $10,000. This is a provision that was significantly lowered as this bill moved through through the state house. Started off as 100,000. The House had it at 60,000. We move it down to 20,000. And I want to emphasize this is only for statewide elections, only for candidates who are running statewide. It would not impact Senate candidates or House candidates. And this is because as statewide elections get more expensive, the party puts in more sort of cost into those elections, and this would help the parties, all 3 of the parties, be able to support their statewide candidates more. The next is the biennial town and county committee reorganization reporting. Parties are reorganizing this year, and this just requires them to report who their county and town committee members are. Especially important right before a presidential election, as those people are eligible to be presidential, whatchamacallit, I'm blanking on the word, delegates. Thank you, delegates. And then the final provision, it just adds the ranked choice voting provisions from S32, the entire bill. We added the version that the House Government Operations Committee was working on. They made some minor changes. The most significant change they made is that in our version of the bill, either a select board or the town legislative board or the town voters could determine whether they wanted to move to ranked choice voting. They just made it so it has to be a vote of the voters of the town to move to ranked choice voting. This is consistent with what current law requires for moving to an Australian vote from a floor vote. So they thought that was more consistent. And we had sort of gone back and forth on that anyway. They also have a provision about waiting for hand count towns to use ranked choice voting because it becomes much more difficult for hand count towns. There are about 100 of them. Those tend to be the much smaller towns because anybody over 1,000 has to have a tabulator. So this is just for hand count towns, sort of waiting on ranked choice voting until there are more provisions in place for it. So that is the entire package. I'm happy to answer any questions, as I'm sure the Secretary of State's team, if you have any of them.
Does the Secretary of State's team want to add anything?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Well done. And thank you for giving us a chance to be here and answer any questions that you have. And hello to the two people who are watching online. So there are really three provisions in this bill that came as priorities for me. Ranked choice voting, the registration of write-in candidacy, because that's really, as Madam Chair said, a bit of mercy and grace for our town clerks who spend hours the night of the election tallying up write-in candidates from across the different races, and this electronic ballot return provision. And I want to talk in particular about this because I want you to understand the amount of time our office has put into planning for this, into vetting the possibilities, and into putting forward what we have a great deal of confidence is the securest method of allowing for the electronic transfer back, which is the only way for some of these groups to be able to cast a ballot. And we have heard election after election, and Director Senning can talk about the stories that he's heard from people who are so frustrated. I am literally putting my life on the line in defense of democracy, and I can't execute a ballot. And so I just want to give you a little bit of the history, and then if you'd like, you can we can get Will to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of how it works. The Overseas Voting Initiative through the Council of State Governments has been meeting for a number of years, and they started an exploration of electronic ballot return in 2019. Jim Condos was the national co-chair of this initiative, and he and Will have done a number of meetings, a lot of focus on this, a lot of exploration of the issues around security and what needs to be put in place in order to securely transmit somebody's ballot back to the clerk's office. And so this was an initiative that Jim felt very strongly about. And when I came into office in January and Will told me about the initiative and all of the vetting that they had done in order to prepare for this, I said, absolutely, let's move forward with asking the legislature to include this in the bill. So that's how it comes to you today, and would love to let Will just describe a little bit about the nuts and bolts of it, if that's okay. Thank you.
Is this on? Thank you, Secretary, and thanks to everybody for having us, letting us talk a little bit about the electronic ballot return provision. I've worked with most of you in the room, but not all of you. For those I haven't, I'm Will Senning. I'm the Director of Elections in the Secretary of State's office. I've been the director for 10 years, which means, counting them up this morning, I believe 12 statewide elections that I've administered for the state of Vermont. And as the Secretary mentioned, this issue of electronic return of ballots, of just effective, I should say, return of ballots from certain groups of voters has been a focus of mine and the previous Secretary Condos, and now Secretary Copeland-Hanzas. And where to start? Senator Hardy did a really nice job summarizing this issue. And in my testimony before both the House and the Senate GovOps committees, I began with the notion that the questions around electronic ballot return are really questions of security of our votes being cast versus voter access, ensuring that all qualified registered Vermonters are able to cast a ballot in every election. And the difficulties surrounding return of voted ballots from overseas, so this is civilians residing overseas or military members deployed overseas, are in my mind one of the biggest barriers right now to ballot access around Vermont elections. I want to acknowledge, right, I said I've been a director for 10 years. I've worked in this building for those 10 years. And in concert with the Vermont legislature, really proud of what we've done over the last 10 years to expand access to the ballot box. We're talking about moving the voter registration deadline so that people can register on election day. Mailing a ballot out to all Vermont voters is the most recent of the reforms we've undertaken with you all that's been highly successful and driven record voter turnout in the last 2 general elections. What I'm getting to is that in my mind, as a director with some experience at this point and a lot of work trying to expand voter access, this is the next logical step. This is the next most important step that we can take to expand and really provide the fundamental constitutional right to vote to people who deserve it. And so, as was mentioned, I've worked on this overseas voting initiative for years with colleagues around the country. So I want to make clear this is not an issue unique to Vermont. In fact, just the opposite. It's an issue discussed at length and all of the time in the meetings I have with my election director colleagues from across the country, trying to come up with the best solution to solve the problem. And it is my strong belief that the system that we are advocating to use, that this bill would put into place, is the most secure system that's been developed around the country for return of voted ballots from voters who are overseas. What it entails, it does touch the internet. I think it's an important distinction between what most people commonly think about as online voting, is a way where you're really kind of casting your yes, no's on the various races down the ballot, and those are being submitted directly into the election management system and made part of the tally. This is really, there have been concepts thrown out, sort of technology put forth and pulled back over the years to accomplish that really kind of online voting. A lot of them for the last 2 or 3 years, you may have been aware, are surrounded, involve blockchain technology. That was sort of the new shiny object 2 or 3 years ago about how we might solve this problem. There were a few sort of ventures into that area, and that has sort of been rolled back because of security concerns that were legitimately exposed with a lot of the blockchain technology that was being proposed. This is different. This system utilizes the Amazon cloud, the AWS Gov Cloud. That Gov Cloud, I had some notes over here. It's been certified for use by the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA. It's where many of our nation's most secure, most important, critical national security documents are stored in this cloud. I think you all know the AWS cloud or have heard of it. The particular system being used is sort of a subsystem in the AWS cloud known as the object lock, if anybody wants to look into it. Sort of an even further, more guarded level of security around this object lock environment. And in a layman's sense, you should think about this similar to, we now do a lot of DocuSign, right? Where you get a document over the internet and you put your signature in and then can submit that signature. It's a similar concept. So it's not transmitting individual votes via the internet. It's a secure place in the AWS cloud to store a PDF that has the votes recorded by the voter through the online portal that they're provided, where it sits in that object lock environment until the clerk says download and print in their town clerk's office here in Vermont. So as the secretary mentioned, we use this system, most of the functionality we're talking about using already to electronically deliver ballots. I will keep this as brief as I can and cut me off when you need to.
Well, I just want to have opportunity for questions and comments.
Let me
So
finish the quick thought.
Yeah.
Just that I don't know if you're familiar with the My Voter page. That's another important reform that we've worked on over the last number of years and has just been so strongly utilized by Vermonters. That's how you'll access this ability You sign into that voter page with first name, last name, town of residence, date of birth, and either driver's license or social security number. Gets you to your specific individual voter unique voter portal. That's where right now you can request, if you're in one of these categories, military voters or voters with disabilities, to have your ballot electronically delivered. It's really cool. Then you click on a link, it brings up the ballot in an online environment where folks with disabilities can use their assistive technology, like Senator Hardy mentioned, to mark their choices on that ballot. It's parallel, almost exactly the same as the accessible voting system that you might see in the polling places. That's also required. It's that same interface. Right now, they complete the voting experience, and the option is print your ballot, such that they can then, they're required to mail it back from anywhere else in the world. The difference here is there would be a different, an additional option to submit the ballot electronically. That then is grabbed from that object cloud via our election management system. So, you know, you've got the PII to log in for the voter. The clerk is the only person who's going to have access to that document to be able to draw it down from the cloud. The clerks log into that system through a unique password and a two-factor authentication process. And so the clerk has a dashboard that they get to every morning that has their election related work. You've got voter registrations to process. You've got stuff coming over from the DMV. You're going to have another option in there. You've got a voted ballot that you need to download and print. They download, print it in their office. And then you've got a printed document. We've worked really hard actually with Brother that makes the printers that serve this system, so that that document looks and feels exactly like everybody else's voted ballot. That's been a long, you know, another trick in providing access to voters with disabilities for a long time, is that the systems they use would produce a ballot that didn't look like everybody else's, and then you can identify that ballot among the ballot bag. These look and feel like everybody else and are processed with everybody else. So these same ballots that come back, right? The tabulation occurs on the tabulator. They're fed through the tabulator and end up in that bin with everybody else's ballot. It's about getting that document from the deck of a submarine, a foxhole in Afghanistan, or a voter in the Peace Corps in China who otherwise has to figure out finding an embassy by which to transmit their ballot back. And as these, I'm gonna cut myself off, but as everybody mentioned, I talk to 5 or 6 voters at least every primary and general election who are inhibited by their circumstances overseas from being able to participate. And I pride myself in trying to solve practical on the ground problems for Vermont voters. That's my main focus. And as the secretary said, coming into this session, my main priority was to address this need, and the bill does so. And I appreciate
Thank
your
you.
support.
Thank you, Will. And I appreciate you, all 3 of you coming over. I'd like to open it to questions and concerns. Dick.
Under the sore loser provisions, what are the mechanics of a person running as a D/P?
That does not change. There in an earlier version of the bill, there was a provision that would have prevented what are called fusion candidates. That came out in the House version of the bill. That is not in the current version of the bill. When you run in a primary, though, current law requires that you run in one primary only. That does not change in the bill. After you win a primary, you can identify if you get the nomination of both parties as a D/P or an R/D or whatever combination it is. That none of that changes from current law. This is just if you run in an individual primary, major party primary, you can't then run again as an independent or another candidate in the
I've always
general.
identified first as a Democrat. Hypothetically, I'm a progressive. I want to run as a progressive candidate, but I want to run a fusion. The Democrats have the primary before the progressives nominate.
No, that's
So I lose the Democratic primary. Can I still run as a progressive now? I think I can.
not under current law. You can't
Even under current.
not under current law. No, you can't. You can only run in one primary. You can be a fusion candidate afterwards. You can take on
An endorsement.
endorsement
Yeah.
of another party. That's not changing. it.
doesn't
What is
change.
what this provision would change is to say if you lose any major, and all three parties have their own primary. There is a progressive, a Democrat, and a Republican primary. You can run in one of those under current law. If you lose one of them, you couldn't then run as an independent or have a vacancy in one of the other parties and then run as that party in the general election. It doesn't change the fusion nature of candidates. There was an earlier provision that is not in the bill anymore.
Thank you. I think this might be a question for Will. You had described a electronic system that's approved by DHS and the FBI. Is that the system that the Secretary of State uses, or is that the system that the vendor uses, or is it both entities?
That's the AWS cloud.
Okay,
What I was referring to.
got it. And is that what the Secretary of State uses?
Yes.
Okay, and is it also what the vendor for this system uses?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Need to use this. This bill is going to be on the floor tomorrow morning. If does anybody else have a concern or question? Andy. Okay, because I just want to make sure that if you have questions, I know that there's been a lot thrown at us, a lot of coming to us in our emails. I really would encourage you to reach out to Andy, to me, to Ruth, or to anybody in the Secretary of State's office.
I just want to point out, if we have ranked choice voting, then the sore loser thing goes away. We won't be a problem. So I hope that we
That's
can
right.
move towards ranked choice voting so we don't have this debate. But I know there's concern about that provision, not limiting the freedom of people to run in different things. But that's more a comment. But I had a question for Will, maybe, or maybe for Ruth, about why is it that these election organizations, the Brennan Center, Common Cause, ACLU, is opposing the electronic voting part of the bill?
Yes. My understanding is that it's concerns about the security, the cybersecurity of the system. And my response to that is, I can't guarantee you this system is 100% secure. I won't be able to guarantee you any system is 100% secure. What I'm confident in is that this is the most secure system we can use. And after sort of years of development, I started my comments with the balance between voter access and security, and that I feel like it's reached the point where it's secure enough that it's worth the benefit that we'll see on the other side.
And I will just add that we did hear from people who were against this provision and people who were for the provision. And one of the reasons we narrowed it in the Senate version was in order to ensure, and we tried to narrow it. And I know the Secretary of State's office is not exactly thrilled with how we've narrowed it, but they're going to make it work if the bill passes, in order to really prioritize the voters we thought were the most disenfranchised. And those are voters who are overseas and really hard for them to mail back their ballots, and then disabled voters. And there's also a report back from the Secretary of State's office in conjunction with the Agency of Digital Services, which is working on cybersecurity issues to make sure that there were no irregularities, or how can we improve the system for the next time, or maybe we shouldn't keep doing it. But there's a report back that will get us to look at that. Just two other quick things. I was at an NCSL elections conference last week. Just coincidentally, it was my counterparts in other states, the chairs of the elections committees in other states. There were about 20 of us, Republicans and Democrats, and I asked them all about this provision. We had a conversation about it. I had a number of people at that conference say, "Hey, do you know Will Senning?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, of course I do. It's a tiny little state." And his reputation in this area around the country is superb. And I can tell you that most of the other states that do this do it in a much less secure way. I had a county clerk from Florida say, "We just faxed them back." And this is a much better system. They said, if Will thinks this is going to work, you should listen to him. So I just want to make sure that you understand that this was not taken lightly, that the Senate Government Operations Committee, this was the provision we spent more time on than anything else. And we really feel like we're in a good compromise space with it. And we really hope that you all can support us on the floor, because it means people who can't easily vote would be able to more easily vote with this. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think we're out of time. I know there are afternoon committees at 1 and at 1:30. So thank you very much. Any questions, please be in touch with